Okay, perfect. So, Marin, I was keen to find out a bit more of in regards to your vision for kind of this pajamas for infrastructure concept that we've spoken about. I think when I joined the team, you spoke about kind of having a contained box, which is kind of like a set of tools and maybe like procedures that we can kind of like develop ourselves within scalability to bring value to kind of other parts of the business. I shared some of those ideas with the team already, and I think there was a slight bit of confusion with pajamas for infrastructure as a concept. I think some people aren't too familiar with what pajamas is from a UX kind of standpoint. Maybe they haven't interacted with the tool, or maybe even if they have, don't quite understand how that would translate to something that we could build within scalability to kind of, I guess, help us and the rest of the business scale.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I didn't really anticipate that, it's not that familiar for engineers in infra. Now, in hindsight, it makes sense, right? Like they haven't worked with this directly, but I was kind of assuming that if you hear pajamas, it's a very catchy name. So you'll kind of at least try to see what it is. I mean, what I can do is I can share the screen and show a bit of what Pajamas is and how this actually relates to where I want us to consider going next and where I want us to see an improvement on the infrastructure side. And I'll try to kind of tie this in with some of the other things that we've done that are pretty much aligned with that. We just don't have a fancy website like UX team has. And obviously they have like 2 to 3 years head start on this. So of course it's like very much more organized. So let me start by doing that first. And
I think examples of things that we've already done, which could kind of fit in there, will be really helpful as well to kind of visualize some examples.
So yeah, this is the Pajamas system. I don't know exactly how they called it, but you can see what it is here. So it's designed GitLab.com. So the important part here is that this is not just a set of documentation that exists here, right? Like it's not just, this is how you do things. This is not a duplicate of a documentation website. This is actually an extension of it. So in the Docs website, you have certain guidelines in what a front-end engineer, a developer, contributor should do when using some of the design components, but it doesn't go into details because, right, like that's not the right place to do that. In the development docs, you want to just explain, this is what you need to use. If you need to know more details, go here. I also understand why this is not in the handbook, because this is very comprehensive. This is not something that is on the company level. It completely makes sense that it's a thing of its own. So if you take a look at that website, like I said, it is about some principles that exist and some guidelines on how to think about certain things. But what I think is very interesting for us in infrastructure is we are not really that far away from this, because if you think about putting something in production, right, like making it run in production, we are no longer just going to ship a feature and hope for the best. We have a set of items in the definition of done that needs to be considered. Something recent, for example, that is still active is rate limiting. Right, like we as Scalability team did rate limiting project almost a year and a bit ago, almost a year and a half ago, and that gave us a step forward. But the product has grown since then. Further, new items were added, and as new events happen from the outside, we realize there are more items that need to be done. So are we as Scalability always going to go in and do a project that will add a new component to the rate limits, or are we going to let development teams who are supposed to be shipping product features that elevate the business further do rapid actions regularly to ensure that they triage everything that happens in there? Well, maybe, but I am trying to say that maybe we want to make this better for all of us. And I think Scalability is positioned the best to do this, especially as part of the next iteration of the platform section. So, just to tie this back in to Pajamas or the design website, apart from having this as a set of guidelines, it also has certain not only instructions on how to use certain things, but also has actual items that you can use. Like, I don't know how designers call this, but let's say, like, I open this label component. This is literally a guideline in how someone adds a label on any page of GitLab, right? But it's not only a guideline. It's not only when to use it, how to use it, and so on. If you open this, like, you literally have a component that you can play with, edit it out, and get that object, put it inside of your application, and that creates a unified user experience across our website. So I don't really recall how much of this you remember, but only a couple of years ago, before we had the design GitLab.com, people were using different drop downs everywhere, right? Like whatever was available at the time, whatever was the shortest. This type of system unified this across. So they didn't go and replace every single button that exists out there. They set a set of guidelines. This is what you need to do going forward. Every time you go through a page and update it, you need to follow the new guidelines. So this is pretty much what I want to see us set up in infrastructure, specifically in scalability for platforms. And I actually have an example of us already doing this, just on a very lower level scale without a fancy website and so on, which is LabKit. So this is created by Andrew, and LabKit is literally this. So we have two LabKit repositories, one for Ruby and one for Golang, because we do have those two types of services. And look, every time you want to import a logging library into your Golang service, this is what you need to do. You don't have to think about how the structure needs to look like and so on. You import it and then follow some of the guidelines that exist there on how to utilize it, rather than you having to adapt it or change things. Because we know that once you actually import this and utilize it in the way that we set it up, you don't have to do anything else for us to put this in production, right? Like, we know exactly how to plug this into the other interfaces that we have, and we actually get out of the box solution that developers don't need to think about. And more importantly, we in infrastructure don't actually have to do much more to put in production. So if I kind of go back to the rate limiting example, how amazing would it be if we had something similar to this, where every time someone creates an endpoint, like an API endpoint, or like, it doesn't really matter, exposes a new endpoint, if they could do an import similar to this and say, all right, now I can go and play a bit with what's the input. All right, like, I have this type of service. I estimate it's going to be probably used this way based on whatever the prep work was done there. So I expect it's going to be okay to run a rate limit of, 2,000 requests per minute, for example. And I'm basing that off of what we have currently in the system on GitLab.com specifically, in a similar type of endpoints, right? Like, we can even, like, whether we visualize it this way or not, that's something long term. But it would be quite amazing if we can, if you select, in our case, it wouldn't be background color, it would be, GraphQL endpoint. And that would give you results for a similar endpoints that we found. You would go to an existing service, you would see their number of requests per minute or second or whatever. And that would kind of give you an indication with which you can work with. you add that into your feature, and that is, I'm not going to say it's going to be a minute of work, but it is definitely faster than creating a rapid action after the fact, or creating a new project that will now have to revise how the feature works and so on. So this is something that we already did before and we are using successfully. So basically what I'm looking to do with Pajamas for infrastructure is formalize this across the different projects we use in Scalability, and start working towards this infrastructure system that would unlock us as well to support not only development, but also the rest of the infrastructure department teams and even ourselves in some cases.
Amazing. Yeah, I kind of understand that. And I think it's a nice vision to help, I guess, us in Scalability, but certainly in wider infrastructure as well, enable other parts of the sort of development organization, and to bring, I guess, consistency and hopefully get to kind of like one way of doing things. One thing that wasn't entirely clear to me there, so I really like the rate limiting example. I think the fact that you focused on endpoints, because there's a whole bunch of attributes that happen or exist against an endpoint, right? There's rate limiting, custom targets, for example, like understanding what the threshold is or how you set a threshold.
Yep.
Do you see this system potentially being a way to just get guidance of how these things work, or do you see it as being a tool to try and action these things as well? So I'm kind of thinking, I think like the industry standard term for these types of tools is like an internal developer platform. Do you see it go in that direction, or not necessarily?
Yeah, I'm not really sure exactly, and this is why I want to kind of think through this a bit, because there is a bit more tied into it, right? There is organization behind it and so on, but ultimately we as a platform team will have to move in that direction, because apart from the growth we are seeing right now, like there is very rarely a significant investment that a company does into its platform teams, right? Like they're looking to get the teams that create customer-facing value, be efficient, and they support whoever supports them as much as, or rather, as bare minimum as necessary, right? Like just whatever you need to do. So actually, I don't really know whether it's going to go in that direction. What I would like is a different story, right? Like that is what I would like us to see do, not only with Scalability, but also with delivery team as well eventually, because this is similar story. It's enablement. It's enabling others to do things more efficiently. And then it elevates the work that all of us are doing as well to a different plane. So instead of resolving the same problem over and over again, you need to think about the different use cases that some of the teams have, work with them, and resolve a problem for a lot of different folks. So the answer is, I don't know, I hope, but I would like to start at least with something. So if we can start with formalizing the work we've done with LabKit, right? Like that is the first thing. We already have something. Let's create, set of guidelines and say that every time you need to log something, this is what you need to do. We have some of that written down, but we need to do a campaign, a regular campaign of working with the development teams to emphasize this at the beginning of development rather at the end. And then also figure out how to include that into the day-to-day workflows, whether that's through pipelines or something else, I honestly don't know. And then try to apply similar recipes to existing things that we have, right? Like one of the items is rate limits that we need to start talking about. Another item is something that is ongoing currently, which is object storage, which is a very similar story to this. We have, I think, 13 buckets at the moment, S3 buckets for different types of files that are actually essentially all the same. They are different in the fact that they're serving different features, but they're doing the same thing. So we are actually pushing this burden onto our customers because they need to configure 13 different buckets to get this done. Instead, we could have created, well, we couldn't have because we didn't exist at the time. But the point is now we can set up a set of guidelines in if you need to interact with object storage, the infrastructure department, scalability team specifically, is setting this guidelines. This is what infrastructure we have can support. We work with the product team to figure out what our customers are actually using. So we can say, and this is what our customers are using. So these are our ceilings. This is what we can absolutely support. So within that, we are telling you that you need to do this, these, and these things in order to store your file in object storage. So that's another one of the examples. And I'm absolutely certain there are more and more like that. Sidekick comes to mind, Redis comes to mind, like all of those items. How do you interact with parts of the system comes to mind, because that is what makes development more efficient, but also allows infrastructure to support development needs.
Yeah, I can see a huge amount of scope here. I think something we spoke about recently in the scalability team, and I think it's wider again into scalability, but is creating a life cycle. And just go back to your point of endpoints, being able to understand the attributes and kind of like how you set things and what they should look like, but also to create that life cycle of, for this endpoint, this is how you get visibility as to how it's performing. Yep. These are the dashboards that relate to it. This is what's expected. I think there is a huge amount of scope in terms of giving all of that visibility to engineering teams in one place. I can certainly see that. I guess thinking beyond that, and I guess similar to my previous question around the internal developer platform, and we don't know what direction this would go in, but it feels like this is just another part of the DevOps lifecycle, right? Like it's like part of like maybe like the manage or monitor, or it probably fulfills quite a lot of those different stages. Do you think it's feasible or efficient to try and build some of these things into GitLab itself? Or do you think as like first iterations, we should be just looking to get it started somewhere and then see how it grows?
What I've successfully done during my tenure here is once I know what the requirements are, what do we need, build it back into the product. So have an example of working that in the delivery team specifically, where we really didn't know all of the items that would be necessary to communicate how a package ends up, or how a deployment ends up on .com. We built that outside of GitLab as a quick sketch, basically, put it in motion, got some feedback, and then we built it back into the product. So over time, as we go into develop is the word. Develop more of the knowledge of what is actually necessary. We can back that into the product, because if we are doing exploration inside of the product itself, that creates huge amount of overhead. I think in the handbook we say, as long as it's within 5x overhead, right? Like it takes 5x time longer to build this, it's okay to take that time. But I think this is because we don't really know all of the items in here. It's probably going to be much, much more than 5x. So I think we need to lower the barrier, get the feedback faster, and then see how we can actually bring that back into the product.
Awesome. This is exciting. I think it's a good a tangible way to kind of show what the vision is as well for scalability. I think it's a good way to expose what we're doing. And ultimately it's a good way to help us have like a higher leverage in terms of how we scale other teams. So yeah, I think there's obviously a lot for us to think about, a lot we can do, but this is exciting.
Excellent. Leon, thanks for asking that question, actually. And I hope this recording is actually going to help out others. And more importantly, I just want to be clear about this. This is why we have hired some really, really smart folks in scalability, I actually need help. And you will need help as well. Like all of us will need help to develop this. And there is no absolutely correct or incorrect way of doing it. I just want to make sure that we are at every single step delivering value. And as long as we are delivering value, we can work to create whatever, whether it's an internal development platform or something else. We can work through that as we go along. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Marin.